I'd just like to take a moment to say thank you to everyone who is joining us for this live and virtual presentation. Today is a very happy day. It's a happy weekend for a lot of different reasons, but for one reason in particular, in that it is the 5th graduating class of the American International College Occupational Therapy Doctorate Program. So we are very, very proud of our graduate, Mariah Steffi. She's just done amazing work in completing a project that is likely to shape advocacy in her area of practice for a very long time. It's really groundbreaking, thorough, and quite remarkable. So I'm going to let Mariah discuss her project for you today, and she'll be happy to take your questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. So hello, my name is Mariah Steffi, and this is my capstone presentation. My topic is occupational therapy's professional scope of practice definitions used in the home and community-based waiver services, an analysis of state-specific policies. This brief review was conducted under the guidance of Dr. Helfrich, Dr. Kornblau, Dr. Barlow, and Dr. Sullivan. So, historically, the vulnerable populations of the elderly, children, and individuals with disabilities have been underserved in the United States. The responsibility to care for vulnerable populations has been recognized by both the state and U.S. federal government, which has led to the development of funding programs. As the medical, social, and economic focus shifts, so has the programs offered to address the needs and challenges faced by these populations. These changes are most notable in the services offered to individuals with intellectual disabilities. The Home and Community-Based Services HCBS waiver program has been created to address the needs of this vulnerable population. However, these individuals are made more vulnerable because of the challenges and barriers they face when accessing and receiving services. The services are inconsistent, unclear, and there are long waiting lists. I have lived experience and a professional connection to both this topic and the individuals serviced by the HCBS 1915C waiver. I have encountered the difficulties in navigating the HCBS waiver system and have seen the frustration around qualifying and receiving services. The purpose of this policy review was to examine how the HCBS waivers for adults with intellectual disabilities define and integrate occupational therapy services in the U.S. Particularly, how does the definition of OT used in the HCBS waiver program impact services available to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities? So to explore my PICO question, I conducted a systematic literature review with peer and gray literature. The keywords used in both the peer and gray literature search included the home and community-based waivers, home and community, HCBS, Medicaid waivers, waiver, 1915C, intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, IDD, autism spectrum disorder, and occupational therapy, OT, and occupational therapists. These terms were used in conjunction with each other to increase the relevancy of the results. The inclusion criteria were adults with autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disabilities, and participants who received funding or services through Medicaid state waivers. The exclusion criteria were individuals receiving funding or services through school-based or other forms of funding, individuals with strictly mental health diagnoses, or strictly physical disabilities. For the gray literature, I specifically focused on the OT scope of practice from each state and the waiver application from each state. I also examined information from the state health departments, the U.S. Department of Health and Services, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services websites to obtain further resources and information regarding their waiver programming. For me to include the waiver applications, it was necessary that they all be the same application, the 1915C, an improved and active waiver that addressed the needs of individuals with intellectual disabilities 21 years or older, have intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, or autism, who are living and receiving services in the home and community. I also required the applications to be the most recent document available to the public and that they could be viewed and were in the public domain. I identified themes and categories that were identified and converted into keywords and phrases that were common across state waivers and the occupational therapy scope of practice definitions. So my results were originally organized into two different tables. The different tables for each different document. The one, the OT scope of practice, and then the one for the waiver applications from each state. So because the occupational therapy scope of practice tends to be broad for each state to encompass the many populations, conditions, and settings occupational therapists can work with, some states provided just a simple definition, while others specified the domains and process of occupational therapy. Keywords or terms were found across the state definitions and the scopes of practice of occupational therapy. These keywords match both the goals and purpose of the HCBS waiver programs and the practice of occupational therapy. So I just want to quick talk about some of these. So some of these common terms used in just the definition included the maximize or improve or highest possible level of independence, and black in my pie chart represents absent, while yellow represents present. So as you can see, there was 17 states where this was present in part of their definition, and there was 33 states where this was absent. Other terms that were seen frequently were the purposeful or meaningful goal-directed occupations or activities, activities of daily living, or everyday tasks of daily living, which was absent in 19 and present in 31. Wait, no, I have it reversed. Yeah, present in 31, absent in 19. And quality of life, which was present in 15 and absent in 35. So there are states that did provide broader details than just a simple definition. And these states had information on topics such as consultative services, including individuals, groups, populations and programs, organizations and communities, care coordination, which was describing OT's role in case management and transition services, and occupational therapy process, which included evaluations, methods, and approaches and interventions. And these were all terms that were chosen because of their overlap, not just in occupational therapy, but their overlap in the purpose of the HCBS waiver. So, okay. So the second document that I examined was the waiver application for every state. And the waiver application for every state is consistent across the United States. However, the contents, the descriptions, and the services available, they vary. And the occupational therapy descriptions were collected from the 1915C waivers applications for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are living and receiving services in their home and community. The terms and phrases that were identified to describe how services in the scope of practice for occupational therapy were depicted were in the 1915C waiver application, and the target group for each state. So, the graph over in the corner, where a waiver application, it tells you, it starts with OT as a standalone service. And that was used to describe, and there's 20 states with OT as a standalone service, and that was used to describe when OT services are provided as a full and independent service. And then the term no occupational therapy services provided, that was used, the term no occupational therapy services describe, the term no occupational therapy services describes that occupational therapy service was not provided under that specific waiver program reviewed for the state. And then the phrase OT combined with other services, that refers to when occupational therapy services were frequently grouped together with physical therapy, speech pathology, rehabilitation engineering technologists, audiologists, and other professionals. These professions are viewed as interchangeable in the waiver application. And then limited OT services. This was another phrase which was used to describe when only an element or area of occupational therapy practice was described, and that this was used to describe when only an element or an area that an occupational therapist can provide was included. And then no 1915C waiver. This was when this particular state didn't participate in the 1915C, or these individuals were covered under a different waiver entirely. So this shows us that these inconsistencies between the state's occupational therapy scope of practice, services available, and the service definitions are prevalent under the HCBS 1915C waivers. There is a notable lack of standardization across the state's scope of practice definitions of occupational therapy, which produces clear inconsistencies in interpretation and implementation of occupational therapy services in the 1915C waiver. The inconsistencies lead to confusion for both service recipients and providers, which can impact the individuals receiving services. So there are 3 important things to consider. First, the successful transitions from school-based care to community-based care are very important for individuals with intellectual disabilities. There are different needs, skills, and goals related to community living. It has been noted that services in childhood are frequently supported through the educational systems, while other services delivered and billable through private insurance or Medicaid waivers vary by coverage. Services generally end both medical and educationally after people transition out of school. However, autistic individuals frequently require continued support during post-secondary transitions in adulthood periods. As individuals served by the HCBS waiver continue to age, their needs, abilities, and interests evolve and change over time. Adults with intellectual disabilities face lifelong conditions and comorbidities which benefit from the continued maintenance and preventative care. Currently, the 1915C waiver program and the services provided do not reflect these changes or provide the flexibility needed to be effective. Secondly, because the funding and eligibility for waiver programming stems from Medicaid, the influence of the medical model is noticeable. Not all individuals or diagnoses respond or require the medical model and related frames of practice. Using the medical model as part of the eligibility and implementation of services can be limiting and not encompass the full scope of occupational therapy. And lastly, many individuals receiving the 1915C waiver are part of the first generation of non-institutional care recipients. Institutional care facilities included occupational therapy services as a standard part of care. While the push to keep individuals in their home and community has not included the same services, it is important to examine and evaluate the tools, programs, policies, and services provided to help this mission. It is a disservice to this population to not include the full scope of occupational therapy services. So, in conclusion, these inconsistencies are particularly clear in the interpretation and implementation of occupational therapy services in the 1915C waiver. There are many avenues for future research regarding occupational therapy in the 1915C waiver program. Further examination and comparison of these services provided, policies, waiting lists, transition support, and costs is necessary. Comparisons across states should examine these questions to strengthen occupational therapy's ability to assert the value of its services and improve the 1915C waiver programming. I have included some next steps to be taken by OT practitioners, OT students, and caregivers, particularly for OT practitioners, continuing to educate other professionals, such as individuals on care teams, and policymakers, advocating for the value of OT and our value with underserved populations, and advocating for funding and policies that support this waiver programming. For OT students, learning and continuing to learn about transition and different services offered after someone graduates, and learning about our role in the profession. Continuing to learn about unique settings and creating a role for occupational therapy. And for caregivers, learning how to navigate, advocate, and qualify for services. So I've also included my acknowledgements and my references, and I would like to read my acknowledgements out now. So to my parents, thank you for always believing in me. To my mom, thank you for being my person and helping me every step of the way and giving up so much to help me reach my goals. To my dad, thank you for supporting me on all my adventures, big and small. To the girls, thank you for being my inspiration and helping shape who I am. To Sean, thank you for bringing more love into my life and balance. And to my Capstone committee, I want to say thank you for providing me with feedback and support throughout this process. I would not be here, guys, without you. This is hard. And that's all I got. I love you too. So, any questions? Perfect.
Do you propose then that this be something that goes to the federal level so that it's standardized across states?
I would love to see that, but I think there is a lot of steps because some states don't even, I think it's a ground up more than a top down kind of thing right now, because the people who recommend occupational therapy services right now are care management. And so if they don't understand what OT's role is and what OTs would be doing with adults with intellectual disabilities, we can't really be recommended in that position. So being able to educate other people that like OT doesn't just work in a school and you don't stop needing OT once you graduate, that kind of thing is definitely a big step. But I think eventually I personally would like to investigate, like I would like to create a role in Pennsylvania to become the occupational therapist to provide these services. That's originally why I became interested in this. I have siblings who qualify for a waiver and in all sense would get occupational therapy, but the way that they qualify for OT in Pennsylvania is you have to have a fine motor difficulty. And so that doesn't, having intellectual disabilities does not automatically equate to a fine motor disability. So because my siblings struggle with sequencing and all these things that would benefit amazingly from OT, they can't get it because they have great fine motor skills. So so I really want to, in PA, kind of work from there, adjusting their scope and understanding of OT, and kind of create this position for myself to serve individuals, and then kind of go on from there and address it on a broader scope eventually. Any other questions?
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've done beyond
Yes.
this in terms of, and the other point I just wanted to make is that the state waivers they're state waivers.
Yeah.
So each state controls it.
Yes. And each state can modify and change the definition, and a lot of states can say that, oh, we can have PT and speech and everyone else double and come in and do whatever role. So there's not really any clear definitions, and that's part of the reason why I looked at the OT scope of practice to say that all of these terms and all these terms fall under both OT and the goals of the HCBS waiver. So that right there, in my opinion, kind of shows that there's a case for OT already. Is that if these are the goals of this program, then OT should already be addressing these areas. And then, and it was interesting just looking at this, just to see how much overlap there was in each state. And then I looked at how each waiver talked about occupational therapy, and even if they did or didn't, and seeing how a lot of them had like limited services where they'd have an OT come in and do an environmental evaluation, which is great and all, but you're missing a huge other chunk of occupational therapy. So I think a lot of it is educating and advocating and really having to worm our way in there, but then explaining, listen, we have a lot more skills that we could be offering to these individuals. And that whoever's writing these has written it so narrow that we're getting written out of an area and a population that we really are beneficial to. Yes.
First of all, great job.
Thank you.
Second of all, I've learned a ton that I was unaware of. And so my question to you is, how can we get this information out to other occupational therapists in these other states that can also kind of work with you on this mission?
I think connecting with, this is an area that I didn't learn about in school. I did not learn about anything that had to do with transition services, anything like that. So I think learning about it early, but then also connecting to other OTs who are already working with people with intellectual disabilities in this. And I saw on OT Commune that there's people who have talked about the waiver before. And so I think jumping on it and reaching out to people, I think is where we would have to start. But because I know some states do it a lot better than others. So I think using some states as a role model would eventually be what I would want to do, and eventually dig deep and be able to compare them on a deeper level, which I wasn't able to do because I can't access that as just general public. But if I create, my goal is to be an independent contractor with PA, I can then get more access and do more research and kind of pick up this hole that I thought was only in PA. And then I opened up a whole big box of worms.
Yeah, you did. But good,
Yeah.
good box. Nice job.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, this is just having been a graduate of the program myself and knowing that there's a policy course. Did you use this
Yes.
same
Yes.
project
Yes.
for the policy? So
This-
did you rub shoulders with a politician to be able to kind of?
Yes, the policy course actually was my jumping off point with this. This was the whole reason I came to AIC was I wanted to conduct this research. I wanted to look at this gap for my sisters, and that's what I came in. That's what I talked about in the entrance interview, and it was really, really big. And I didn't have the words, and I didn't have the information to even get started. But then when I went and I took the policy class, it really broke it down. And that became where I could identify that's where the issue starts, or that's where the wording is the problem. And I was able to talk to some senators, and I was able to kind of explain that when you're cutting Medicaid, this gets cut first. This is a hidden cut that no one talks about. And that these are individuals that they're already such a long waiting list and so many hoops to jump through. And there's already so many versions of the waiver with such limited funding in each version. I didn't even look at that. I honestly, because each state can have like 10 different waivers, and some states will have ones for brain injury, some states will have ones for mental health, which it's awesome. And then some states will be like, no, we only got one, or we have two. And it'll be like a big state that'll only have two. But I was able to talk to some senators and be like, this is why when this comes up, can you vote against cutting this? Because these are hidden populations that we have already worked on deinstitutionalization for. And when we cut services, we make it harder to keep them out of institutions. So that definitely the policy course was the jumping off. I was able to get a lot of the legwork done for it, a lot of the state research. But no, it was, I think I had 4 topics before this. And I did a little bit of research in all of them. But I think this one was the one I was the most passionate about in the end, really. Yeah.
It's impressive. You must have an incredible data bank now of information, this plethora of information.
I do.
I can't imagine others, in this area, other OTs across the country can only wish to have, so I wish you luck as you keep going with this, because I think you've got a gold mine here. And, and it's, what's best, I know you could tell you were nervous at the beginning, but just to watch you now, it's so impressive. You did a really good job, and it just oozes out of you, and nicely done.
Thank you. Yeah, I have like 3 giant Excel spreadsheets because I was like, I don't know what information I need, so I'm gonna take all of it. My mom helped me cold call states to get information. That was rough. They don't want to talk to you. They don't know what you're asking for ever. But that goes to show that parents and caregivers can't get access to any of this. They don't know what's happening. And a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to be able to advocate or get these services lined up early enough. So a lot of people are trying to get these services together when their caregiver is not eligible to do it anymore. So it's a lot of hoops, and it's long waiting lists. Like Pennsylvania had like 5 years for one waiver, and like one was that you had to have a caregiver die. So like there was like you had to have specific circumstances to even get the waiver. So there's a lot of avenues that I could go with this. I had to keep it small, thank God, because I'd be here for a while. But I'm very passionate about this population, and I feel like it's been it's always been not taboo, but it's always been kind of hidden. And OT's role in it shouldn't get forgotten just because we've shifted settings and we've shifted focus. We've actually become even more holistic with what we're trying to do now. And so it would only make sense that OT would carry over and continue. And I think that's kind of gotten forgotten in the wayside. Yes.
So this is our first policy-based capstone.
Okay.
And it's so, I mean, while the information is so disturbing,
Yes.
just at a core level of what are we doing for the humans who most rely on the support of the state to help them have a meaningful quality of life. What would be your advice to faculty to help encourage and motivate students to investigate policy as a subject for doctoral capstone?
I think that I did not consider myself doing a policy capstone ever.
Right?
That wasn't what I intended, but looking at the root and where the most change can be made, I think is what brought it to policy. And I think that's important for individuals to consider is where can you make the most difference and where can OT be the most effective and where can you highlight the most issue, really? And for me, it was definitely policy. And I think that other students can, if they're very passionate either about a setting, about any type of topic, if you can tie it back to either what's allowing us to do this or what's not allowing us to do this, you can find policy. And I think that is a big giveaway. And I think that's the thing that's really holding OT back is that we're not advancing as much in policies. And I think that for the future of OT, it means talking policy, even though we'd rather be treating. That's where we want to be. But I think that means that we have to be talking policy. That means that we have to throw our hat in the ring and be like, this is important to us. So we're going to have to do the hard work and do the stuff that doesn't involve our patients, which is where we want to be. But this is the betterment of our field and our patients.
Well said.
Yes.
Yes, I think you've poised yourself really nicely because you have the personal connection and passion coupled with all of this research, plethora of research that you've done, that I see you standing at a podium at a hearing and giving an expert testimony, and really advocating for our profession. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
So well done.
Thank you. Yes.
I think you mentioned something at the end about having more OTs involved in policy. This is actually a great point. There is a push now to have students doing their level 2 in in Congress and in with politicians to learn how to advocate for the profession. So this is maybe we should push for more than that, for that more as well. It's going to have a project like this.
That is one reason why I wanted to bring Dr. Kornblau in on the committee, because she is a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow for the purpose of improving leadership and advocacy in occupational therapy. So it was my pleasure to be able to introduce her to you, and I'm hoping that Dr. Helfrich, Dr. Kornblau will be, and Dr. Barlow, whose policy class is where this came in, are there for you as you advance in your career and really start to be the seed that sprouts a great tree of accomplishment and progress in this area. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nice job.